Let's talk about the most disappointing books I read in 2020. I've already done my worst books of the year list. If you want to check out that video, I'll leave the link below. But this is my most disappointing books of the year list. And to me, that's more egregious of a crime than being a bad book, because I expected more from these books. I expected to enjoy these books, and they let me down. So let's start the list off with number 10, which is Skin Game by Cara Mckenna. I read Willful Victim by Cara Mckenna last year and absolutely loved it. It was a total surprise because I just didn't know that I was going to love it as much as I did, and it ended up on my top 10 best of the year list in 2019. I read the sequel and enjoyed it enough. It wasn't my favorite, but I definitely didn't hate it. And so I went into this one with high expectations just based on liking her work before. Skin Game is an erotica novel that's almost a reality show of sorts. Think The Amazing Race mixed with a little bit of Big Brother. It's about a group of contestants who take part in this experiment, but it feels very much like a reality show where they have to compete against each other to eventually win a prize. They're competing in some physical challenges as well as some psychological challenges. Now, to me, that sounded like a super unique premise, and it definitely was. I enjoyed the book overall. I definitely don't regret reading it, but I just feel like the things that Cara McKenna really succeeds at in Willful Victim is something that's lacking here, and that's just like character motivations. I felt like the interactions and the relationship in Willful Victim was so real and honest and authentic and just like something you would experience in everyday life. Whereas, I guess because of the ridiculous circumstance of this novel, the interactions between the characters didn't always feel as nuanced, didn't always feel as natural. I feel like the characters were done in very broad strokes, but that often happens in a type of reality show competition sort of situation. When you watch a reality show, you see that this person is the villain, and this is the girl next door, etc., etc. And I feel like that happened here, and we didn't really get as deep into the characters as I would have liked. I was hoping that she would kind of round out the characters in a more dynamic way, and that didn't really happen. I feel like some of the most interesting characters ended up leaving way too soon, way before their time, and they were the ones I was the most interested in seeing more of. And just overall, like, while I enjoyed this novel, it just wasn't as exciting and as good as I was expecting it to be. Number 9 is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Doughty. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes is a non-fiction about Doughty's life and work as a mortician. I thought that I listened to this on audiobook, and I was expecting to enjoy this because I've seen a lot of people who have somewhat similar taste and attitudes enjoy this a lot, so I just assumed I was going to as well, but unfortunately I just didn't. I don't know anything about her, really. I believe she's an influencer of sorts, and she likes to kind of talk about her work as a mortician and try to talk about death and make it a little more normalized, I guess. But I've never actually checked out any of her videos or her social media accounts, so I don't really know anything about her other than this book. I found parts of the book really weird and uncomfortable. There were like chapters where she would go on and on about how disgusting fat people are when they die because of like the scent they give off, and it was just, I just found that some of the chapters really rubbed me the wrong way. A lot of people said that when they listened to this novel or read this novel that they came away having a different perspective on death, and that's just not really what happened to me. I feel like my perspective going into the book was pretty much the same as coming out. It didn't really normalize it for me, or I enjoyed hearing about how death is a business just like anything else, but I really didn't come away feeling anything else towards the book or the mortician industry. Number 8 is The Pearl by Tiffany Reisz. This is her third novel in the Godwick series. I love this series so much. The first 2 books I own copies of because like I die hard love them. They are 2 of my favorite erotica novels ever, and Tiffany Reisz is probably my favorite erotica writer ever. But this one just kind of disappointed me. I read this as an ARC during the summer, which I was so excited about because I knew I was going to buy it anyways, so getting it for free was great. But unfortunately it just didn't quite live up to the first 2 books in this series. This series has 3 books in it, and they're all very different. They follow different members of this one family, which is the Godwicks, and it's kind of about their adventures, falling in love, and having a lot of weird sex. but those sexual experiences are kind of tied to objects and mystical experiences, which is hard to explain, but essentially the first one has a lot to do with artwork and hallucinatory sexual experiences. The second one has to do with Greek mythology and, once again, hallucinatory sexual experiences. And this third one didn't really have any of that, and that's where it fell short for me. The first two had almost these weird, otherworldly sex scenes because they weren't really taking place in the real world. It was more of like a dreamlike experience, whereas in the third book, it just kind of skipped all that, and it was more based as like an actual relationship with actual real life sex scenes, which, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not what I was expecting from this series in particular, and I love the first two books so much because of how unique those sex scenes were, and this just didn't really have that. I think that this is a book a lot of people would like. I just wish that they had kept upping the ante like they did in the first two books. Number 7 is The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. I've only ever read one Agatha Christie book before this, and that was And Then There Were None, and I read it in the 8th grade. I absolutely loved it, and I've always wanted to read more Agatha Christie since then. So I decided, of course, that I would start with her super popular Perrois series. I have no idea if I'm saying that correctly. But essentially it's a series of mystery books starring one detective named Hercule Perrois. My French is crap. And where he's investigating a murder at a house full of rich people. I don't know. I listened to this on audiobook and I just didn't love it. There were so many characters, I couldn't keep any of them straight, and like when I got to the end, I didn't give a crap about who killed this person because I didn't know this person. I didn't know any of the characters. They had no defining characteristics about them at all. And honestly, I just don't have a lot to say about this book because it wasn't memorable to me at all. It was disappointing because I really thought I was going to have a new series to read and love, and honestly, I just don't think I'm going to continue on with this series. The first book wasn't for me, and maybe I'll try some more of Agatha Christie's standalone mysteries, and maybe I'll enjoy that more, but I'm not really sure because honestly, I reread And Then There Were None a couple years ago and didn't enjoy it nearly as much as I did when I was 13. Number 6 might be a bit of a controversial one, but that's Vicious by VE Schwab. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't hate this book. I actually think I gave it 3.5 stars, so this was not a bad book by any means, but I was expecting perfection. I was expecting this to blow my mind and fall in love with these characters, and I thought it was going to be my new favorite book. And it just didn't live up to the hype whatsoever. Vicious is about two boys, Victor and Eli, who are best friends in school, and they embark on this quest to basically turn themselves into superheroes, or give themselves superpowers at the least. Essentially, they figure out the way to do this is to almost kill yourself, like have a near-death experience. And so they go about doing this, and eventually they become enemies. One of them goes to prison and kind of plots his escape and what he's going to do to the other once he gets out of prison. So I never read anything by VE Schwab before, and the way people described her writing, I was super intimidated. I was scared to go into this book because I was like, it's gonna go way over my head, it's gonna be super dense, I'm like not going to get anything that's going on or something. I don't know. I was intimidated because of like what an expert writer people made her out to be, and I just didn't find this was the case. She's not a bad writer, like I said, but she's not a bad writer by any means, but I don't think she does anything significant in her writing that's any better than most other writers out there. Like, her writing was pretty simplistic, and I enjoyed it, and it was a fun ride, but it was not as deep as people were making it out to be. My biggest problem with this book is that their actions are kind of leading up to these two big moments. The first moment is when they go from being best friends to enemies. You're seeing two different timelines. It goes back and forth between the past and the present. And when you start off the book, they're best friends, and the past storyline is leading up to the moment where they become enemies. The present is when one of them gets out of jail and is plotting his revenge on his ex-best friend. But you don't know what that moment is that kind of drove them apart and that like destroyed their friendship. And so that moment was super important. That had to be epic. And for me, that's where the book failed, is it just felt like the right amount of effort it didn't go into that scene, and it felt to me like it was the most important scene. I needed to understand why they were driven apart and why they hate each other so much even after 15 years. And while I understand that like one of them sent the other to prison and that part makes sense, it doesn't really make sense to me why he sent him to prison, because the moment felt so blown over. The characters themselves I enjoyed, but I didn't feel like they had enough interactions with each other to really get a good look at them. I always love a found family aspect, and I heard that that was a great thing about this book, and I didn't feel like it worked nearly as much as people were saying it did. And overall, I enjoyed the book. It was a fun ride, and I'll read the second one, but it just wasn't this epically great thing that I was expecting it to be. Number 5 of most disappointing books that I read in 2020 is TheOne by John Marrs. This book is a thriller that takes place in a world where there is this technology that can determine who is the one for you, who is your true soulmate. You give them your blood, and then they track down this person who's your soulmate, they give you your results, and then, yeah, happily ever after. This book follows 5 different perspectives of 5 different couples who have been matched up from this technology. There were things I enjoyed about this book, like the fact that there were very short chapters, which always propelled you to want to read more. That's something that I will always enjoy, especially in a thriller. But I feel like the amount of perspectives is kind of where this fell short, because none of these characters felt like real fleshed out characters, because you just couldn't get to know them nearly enough because there were 5 freaking perspectives to go through. I also felt like all the storylines played out exactly as you expected them to. There were no real twists. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was twist after twist after twist, but they were all extremely predictable. I feel like every single one of those storylines got wrapped up in such a nice, neat little bow, which is not really how I like my thrillers to go. And overall, this just didn't work for me. I wish that maybe this had been a series and these storylines were broken up into different books or different episodes of a TV show. I think that would be great. Number 4 is another thriller, and that is Believe Me by JP Delaney. This was so bad. This is one of the worst thrillers I think I have ever read in my life. It probably should have been on my worst books list instead of my most disappointing, because I'm not totally sure if I was expecting a ton from it, but I know JP Delaney is at least somewhat popular because I believe their book, The Girl Upstairs or something, did pretty well, but I've never read that one. But I picked up this one because it was cheap on audiobook. I saw it on sale and I was like, yeah, I could use a thriller. I was kind of on a thriller binge, so I figured this one would be okay. It was not. It was terrible. This is about a girl who wants to be an actress, and this law firm ends up hiring her to essentially entrap husbands where the wives are trying to divorce them and they want to get a settlement. I don't know. Or they want to get them to break their prenup, I guess. That sounded like a fun premise, but I feel like that premise went out the window pretty quickly. And this ends up more being about this woman who ends up falling for one of the men that she's trying to entrap. And from there, it just kind of gets ridiculous. There's like twist after twist, but in a way that they're all incredibly stupid and over the top. Like really over the top. Nothing at all feels believable. Like, I know that in thrillers and stuff you sometimes have to kind of stretch your suspension of disbelief, but this was like stretching it across a fucking bridge. Like, none of this made any sense. And he was clearly this rich guy, but the lengths he was going to help her in her career and stuff was just insane. Like, at one point he's basically at one point he's essentially paying to put on a play for her that she can star in, and I'm like, what world are we living in that you would do this for somebody you've been dating for like a couple months? Everything just felt really stupid, and then the end I enjoyed, but it was not worth the trip getting there. Number 3 of most disappointing books I read in 2020 is Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. I've seen this on a lot of people's top 10 lists this year, and I'm kind of surprised because I did not enjoy this. I actually gave it a 3.5, I think, when I was rating it, which is ridiculous, but I think I did that because it was such a terrible book at the beginning. I honestly didn't think I was going to get through it, but at the end I no longer wanted to throw the book out a window, so I considered that good because clearly I was rating on a curve by this point. This book is about a group of people who essentially end up being held hostage during an apartment viewing. It's also about the detective who's trying to catch the person who did this holdup. My problem, honestly, the whole book was my problem. The first half of this book was so insufferable. I honestly didn't think I was going to get through it. I got this as an arc on NetGalley back in the summer, and I felt so excited because I'd never read anything from Fredrik Backman before. But I really hope this isn't what the rest of his writing's like, because these characters were so bad and so cringy, and nobody talks like this in any way. Like, they were all just so ridiculous and very sitcom-y. And it felt like he did that on purpose so that they could have like an arc. You would start off hating these people but come to know them over the course of the book and come to empathize with them by the end. But I was like, no, I just hate them. Like, I just want to put down this book and never pick it up again. I ended up finishing it on audiobook once it finally was released, because there was no way in hell I was going to be able to actually physically read it. He also has a penchant for just like going on and on about nothing. He'll mention something in a sentence and then go on for 3 paragraphs about how ironic that word is, and I'm like, why? And then came the ending, which, like I said, by the end of the book, I didn't hate it as much, and so I feel like I rated it higher than I should have. But honestly, thinking back on the ending, it was just so sappy. And that's something that, like, I'm not into at all. I don't like being emotionally manipulated, and I feel like this very much was doing that. I absolutely can see that there are people out there who would love this. I think if you like emotionally sappy things, this will totally be up your alley, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just definitely not for me. Number 2 on this list, another controversial opinion here probably, but is TheIlluminae Files series by Kristoff and Amie Kaufman. I read all 3 of these books and I hate myself for it. I don't know why I did this to myself. I did not enjoy the experience. I read the first book physically and didn't like it. I thought it was fine, mediocre, not that great. But then I heard that the audiobooks were great and that was the way to go. So I listened to the next one on audiobook and had the exact same experience as I had with the first one. I just thought it was fine. But at that point, I had read 2 out of 3 books, so I was like, well, I might as well finish the book, especially if I can just listen to it on audiobook. So I did that, and once again, it was fine. I just don't understand why these are so beloved to me. It just comes down to the fact that, once again, there's nothing wrong with these books, but there's nothing worth writing home about either. These are very much space adventure books. One of my biggest problems with these books is that all 3 of them are nearly identical. Each book has a different couple at its core, but all the characters are the exact same characters. They all talk exactly the same, with the same pithy, sarcastic jokes and flirtations. It's the same dialogue for every single character. They also all have the same dynamic where, like, that hate to love, but like they don't really hate each other, but they start off like kind of bitchy or whatever, and then they begin to flirt, and by the end they love each other. Like, it's the same characters, the same dynamic. I'm reading the same story over and over again, and I just don't understand. I didn't root for any of these characters, I didn't care about any of these characters, and overall I just felt like this was so mediocre. To me, this is very much like a blockbuster movie, like where it's good and enjoyable and a popcorn treat, but it's nothing that I'm going to remember. It's nothing that there's nothing that speaks to my soul about it. It's just fine. And number 1 on my most disappointing books of 2020 list, but hold on, because I do have an honorable mention after this book that I forgot about until now. But my number 1 is From Lukov with Love by Mariana Zapata. This is another instance where I just don't get the hype, and I was expecting so much from this book, and it really let me down. This is about a girl who used to be an award-winning figure skater. But her and her partner had a falling out, and ever since then, she's kind of had to let go of her dreams. Until she finds out one day that this Olympic-winning figure skater, the head of his field, wants her to be his next partner. The problem is that they absolutely hate each other. So overall, I can tell you that the thing I just didn't like about this was the writing. The writing was just not good. And I'm kind of used to that with erotica, and it's not always the best writing because it is self-published. They don't necessarily have the money for really intense editing. But the way that people talk about Mariana Zapata books, I just assumed that the writing was going to be really phenomenal. You know, when I read a Penelope Douglas book, even though I don't necessarily love her books, she's definitely a good writer. There's never anything that I'm just like screaming at because the writing's so poor or anything. I just don't happen to like her books as much because of other issues. Whereas with this, the writing just got to me so much. It was so repetitive, which drove me crazy. There were moments in the first couple chapters where I would read 10 or 15 pages and she was still having the same inner monologue. She was still having the same thoughts that were just going around and around in her head about why she could or couldn't do something. And I was like, could you just make the decision and can we please move on? Like, I don't understand. And that just kind of felt like the entire book. I know that Mariana Zapata is known for her slow burn, and I enjoy slow burn. To me, it wasn't how long it took them to get together. It was just, you have to give me something in those pages. There has to be something happening. And it just felt like there was a lot of nothing happening. Although I will say the way the characters acted toward each other was kind of annoying because their version of hate was just very childish, and I was like, you guys are in your mid-20s, why are you acting like this? It's ridiculous. But I could have probably got past that if I was enjoying the writing more. It also has a lot of tropes, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was not my favorite when it just feels so blatantly obvious. Like the trope of one of them getting sick and having to take care of the other, or the trope of them having to take care of children together. Like, it's just, how many tropes can you shove into one book? I just fully expected myself to love this book, and I most definitely did not. Now on to my honorable mention. I meant to mention this in my worst of the books of 2020 list, and I completely forgot, so I'm just gonna add it here. And that would be the comic series Morning Glories. This pissed me off so much. Morning Glories is a comic book series about a group of kids who end up at this school together. And weird shit starts happening. And they can't really figure out why. At first they think it is some sort of test from their teachers, but eventually just more and more weird stuff starts happening, and at a certain point they're just trying to survive. I read 60 issues of this bitch, and at first I was enjoying it. It very much feels like a YA comic book version of Lost, which is a show I absolutely loved. And despite all the haters, I still love that show. I still have fond memories of it. This comic, on the other hand, I have no fond memories of. It played around with time travel so much that at a certain point you couldn't keep any of it straight, and I feel like that was the point. They're like, oh, if we just fuck around with this so much, then they're not gonna even try to figure it out. Then they won't be able to point out all the plot holes because nobody could make sense of this if they wanted to. But like, that's not how that works. You have to give me some answers to keep me going, and that just never seemed to happen. These characters had no personality whatsoever. That's the thing that Lost did right, is you gave a crap about the characters because you really got to know them. You didn't get to know any of these characters. I couldn't tell you a single thing about any of them. But as it was going, I was like, I'm getting close to the end, so I'm gonna get answers, and then I can move the fuck on. And then I finished issue 60. And nothing happened. There were no answers, and it turns out that the writer just abandoned the series. It's never gonna be finished, and we get no answers. Like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm pretty sure my head just about exploded. I was so angry. So this is not just me telling you like, oh, you shouldn't read this. This is a warning. Do not read this. It is such a waste of time. It is such a waste of money. Don't do it. It's horrible. I might have some unresolved anger towards some of these books. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll come back in soon. Bye.